Number 5 on this list is the Greek financial crisis. Greece, one of the most beautiful places in the world. A destination on pretty much all of our vacation lists, I think. Back in 2015, it got a whole lot cheaper for us to go there if we wanted to as well, because the Greek economy basically completely collapsed. Now, Greece for a while had been looking like they were in trouble monetarily speaking, but in 2015, it all came crashing down. Investopedia says, in 2015, Greece defaulted on its debt. While some said Greece simply fell into arrears, its missed payment of 1.6 billion euros to the International Monetary Fund was the first time in history a developed nation has missed such a payment. So that was a really bad thing to happen and basically meant that Greece was bankrupt. Millions of Greek citizens lost their jobs during this time. It was also a time where a lot of Greek people were leaving the country because they simply couldn't get any jobs in Greece. Well, believe it or not, an issue as complex and devastating as this one was predicted by The Simpsons. Or at least it was predicted to some extent. NME writes, the financial crisis in Greece rumbled on in 2015, hogging headlines for weeks, but the US show saw things going awry years before. Just witness this small subtle gag in the 2013 episode Politically Inept with Homer Simpson. As Springfield's most lovable buffoon is being interviewed on TV, a news ticker flashes on screen below with the headline, Europe puts Greece on eBay. So it's not a direct prediction stating that the entire country's economy is going to fall apart, but putting a country on eBay paints a pretty clear picture, I'd say. Number 4 on this list is the three-eyed fish. Three-eyed fish, not really something that I think anybody wants to see. Kind of something that you would expect to be swimming around Dr. Frankenstein's aquarium if he ever had one. Well, The Simpsons took it a step further. NME says, in a 1990 episode, Bart catches a mutated three-eyed fish in the local river, a nod to the pollutant effects of the town's nuclear power plant. Over 20 years later, in 2011, a real-life fish and practically a dead ringer for its cartoon counterpart was discovered in an Argentinian reservoir located near a nuclear facility. Now, there are a number of reasons why nuclear power has some question marks associated with it, but this is a major one right here. Literally a three-eyed fish, guys. And that's just one of the fish that we've seen. Think about how many other fish that are waiting to be found down there that have legs growing out of them and stuff like that. It also makes you think about some of the horrible disasters that we've seen from power plants like this before. Obviously, Chernobyl is the one that comes to mind. If this fish happened to have this happen to it by just being around a plant, then think about what happened to the animals near that disaster. We could have had a full-on mutant creature roaming around that area and just have no idea about it. Hopefully, The Simpsons don't predict any more mutant stuff, because I don't want to be doing a video about how they got that right as well. Number 3 on this list is robot librarians. There's been a large movement recently, a push, I guess, about how robots or automated machines are going to be taking our jobs. 100 years ago, if you would have brought this up, people would have thought that you're crazy, but nowadays, it's a real thing that's happening. In fact, it's already going on. Car manufacturers, for instance, an industry that used to have a ton of jobs for people 100 years ago, is almost all machine operated now. At the end of the day, they're just simply quicker, more efficient, less accident prone, and don't need to get paid hourly. These robots are taking all kinds of jobs other than just car manufacturers as well. The Simpsons, believe it or not, actually predicted one of them. NME says, another highlight from Lisa's wedding here, as Lisa's college librarian turns out to be an android and one who violently burst into flames too. There haven't been any blown circuit board disasters in Chicago yet, but in 2011 it was announced the city's new Joe Enrica Mansueto library would have a robotic librarian who'd helpfully retrieve books for you. You know, I always thought about librarians as having a human element to them, but I guess robots would know more about books than we would. I don't know though, still feels super weird and creepy to have a robot explain to you what a book is about or something. Also, literally taking human jobs right now. If they can do a librarian's job, then why can't they do a teacher's job or a business person's job or my job? Ugh. Number 2 on this list is the voting. The last time we did a video, we looked at this incident, but I think in the current political climate and the state of the world right now, it has to be revisited. In 2018, The Simpsons released an episode where it had Homer voting for the next American president. He had two options. There was Barack Obama and John McClane, who were both actually going for it at the time. In the episode, Homer very clearly clicks to vote for Obama, but the machine that he's using decides that it wants him to vote for John McClane. A funny joke and a stab at elections and voting and all that. Little did we know how accurate it was about to become though. Fast forward to the next election. Now it's between Obama and Mitt Romney for the American presidency. This time the funny gag in The Simpsons, well, that actually happens in real life. A voting machine for Pennsylvania had to be removed because it kept changing any votes for Obama to votes for Romney. There was a full-on video that surfaced on the internet of somebody trying to vote for Obama but just couldn't because of the machine. Luckily, this was fixed and didn't cause too much of a stir in the actual results of the election. But American election scandals were far from over. Remember all the scandals about the potential Russian involvement in the election? About how they rigged the vote and gave Donald Trump an unfair advantage? We've never fully confirmed that, but basically that was predicted by The Simpsons as well if it did actually happen. It's not quite the same as a busted voting machine, but it definitely would have been tampering with the election, which was the whole thing The Simpsons were making fun of in the first place. Hopefully from here on out we can have some solid, non-messy elections and keep this Simpsons thing as it was intended to be. Just a funny joke. And finally, number 1 on this list is President Trump. Regardless of your political views, predicting a president literally decades before they actually become president is kind of a scary ability. That's exactly what The Simpsons did though with President Trump. NME says The Simpsons writers predicted Donald Trump would become president back in 2000. The episode, Bart to the Future, envisions the futures of Bart and Lisa Simpson. The latter, with an uncanny resemblance to Hillary Clinton, has become the first female president of the United States. As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump, she says to her advisors. They then inform her that her predecessor has bankrupted the country. So Lisa is literally alluding to the fact that Trump was the president and that during his presidency, he left the country in financial shambles and now she needs to dig him out of the hole. Not totally far from the truth, honestly. How the hell did The Simpsons know this? Was this just luck of the draw? Clearly The Simpsons must know some stuff that we don't, folks. Look out for their next presidential prediction, it might just come true.
Number 5. President Trump. This is probably the most famous prediction attributed to America's favorite family, and you gotta admit it's a little bit kooky, so let's just get it right out of the way so we can do the rest of the video. In the season 11 episode, Bart to the Future, we get a glimpse into one of the many possible future timelines for the Simpsons family. It's a pretty good episode. The family has a picnic disturb and stops off at a nearby casino. Bart sneaks on in and is caught by the manager, who wants to show him a vision of his future if he keeps up his nefarious ways. It's pretty depressing. Bart grows up to be a loser slacker who's roommates with Ralph, and Lisa grows up to be president of the United States. And she's doing a pretty good job, managing with all the troubles left behind from President Trump. Wait, when did this episode air? 2000? 2000, okay, oof. Now obviously this episode gained a ton of notoriety and popularity after 2016, and I wonder why. All because of a throwaway joke. Obviously the creative team had to speak out on this one. Matt Groening, creator of The Simpsons, said that he never thought he'd actually become president. Dan Greeny, writer for the show and the writer of that joke in question, offered this in an interview saying, "It just seemed like the logical last stop before hitting bottom. It was pitched because it was consistent with the vision of America going insane." No comments. This prediction even gets referenced much later on in the series. An episode from season 28, airing 4 days after the inauguration, has Bart writing on the chalkboard, "It sucks being right sometimes," obviously alluding to the controversial president's election. Now you've probably seen an image passed around the net too of Trump descending an elevator looking exactly like a real picture of the 45th. Well, The Simpsons are good, but they're not that good. Now the first joke we mentioned is from 2000, but that picture that you've probably seen an uncle share on Facebook all the time is from a digital webisode from 2015, around the time the campaign was happening. So they only predicted it the once. And that's probably enough. Now if you're a big Top 5 Scary fan, you know I love predictions, all the greats. Nostradamus, Baba Vanga, Homer Simpson. And I predict that you'll keep subscribing for scary videos hot and fresh every day. Let's keep on going. Number 4. Disney buying Fox. While maybe this one is only terrifying if you're afraid of corporate conglomerates. In the 1998 episode, When You Dish Upon a Star, through a series of contrivances, Homer crashes through the window of Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger and ends up becoming friends with the stars, rubbing elbows with a few Hollywood alums, including Ron Howard, beloved Hollywood director and narrator from Arrested Development. Over the course of the episode, Homer desperately tries to get Ron to produce his screenplay, a masterpiece about a scary robot driving instructor that travels through time for some reason or another, and a talking pie that's the robot's best friend. Now all this is a bit of a preamble because the prediction comes right at the end of the episode, in a blink and you'll miss a joke. When Ron Howard does end up pitching Homer's script, we see a sign on the 20th Century Fox building that says a subdivision of the Walt Disney Company. A full 21 years before Fox would be absorbed into Disney. Now, showrunner Al Jean tried to downplay this. When someone asked him about it, he said, "Predictions? I predict that people will make far too much of that mere coincidence." Which I guess he is, right? Because here I am, talking about it now to you. But if he predicted that, and he's right about that, then is he trying to downplay the other predictions? How did you know, Mr. Jean? Did a wizard do it? Now, on another note, I think this is kind of funny. But if you want to watch The Simpsons online, you have to go to Disney Plus since that's where the entire series is streaming. And on Disney Plus, there's a subcategory called Simpsons Predicts, which was very helpful for this episode. It's a playlist of all the episodes attributed to have a little soothsaying. All the episodes I mentioned are going to be on that list if you want to brush up after the video, including When You Dish Upon a Star. I think it's kind of a funny coincidence that they include an episode based on a 1-second frame predicting that Disney will buy Simpsons on their collection of things Simpsons predicted on their Disney website. Okay, I'm rambling like I'm Abe Simpson. Number 3, tobacco. Now like I was saying, I wore an onion on my belt, which was the style at the time. Oh, sorry, I'm still rambling. Our next prediction from The Simpsons is kind of a cheat because the person in question was directly inspired by the episode, but the context is terrifying and hilarious enough. In the season 11 episode, E.I.E.I. Annoyed Grunt, after becoming obsessed with the concept of dueling, Homer goes around challenging just about everyone in Springfield until he crosses the rich Texan, who actually accepts Homer's duel. Terrified, he flees to his childhood farmstead and decides to begin life anew as a rural farmer, but after having some trouble growing anything, he asks Lenny and Carl for a little plutonium, and he kickstarts a crop he calls tobacco, a rancid combination of tobacco and tomatoes. Now the joke here obviously is that is disgusting and no one in their right mind would ever want to eat that, but never underestimate a dedicated fan base, because in 2003, scientist Rob Barr wanted to grow his own tobacco, and the absolute madman actually did it. He claims what he initially grew he thinks would have been completely inedible and lethal for humans to eat. Why did he do this? Well, the answer is honestly a lot more earnest than you might think. He's just a massive fan of The Simpsons, and this episode was one of his all-time favorites. He loved the anti-smoking message, and he was curious if a dumb pun was possible to grow into a real plant, and it totally was. He even sent off one of his tobacco plants to the writing team responsible for the episode, and as a reward, he was even brought on to do DVD commentary of the episode after growing it, elevating himself to Simpsons superfan status. And I cannot imagine that they tasted good. Number 2, the NSA, and Tom Hanks a little bit. Okay, take your brain back to 2007. Remember the Simpsons movie? Absolute classic. Basically, just 2 hours of The Simpsons on fire. Some of the best jokes they've ever had, taking the show we love to its biggest extremes. After Springfield's toxic waste problem becomes too much to bear on the rest of the country, President Schwarzenegger, and don't worry, that's not the prediction, decides that the best solution is to place a big glass dome over the city of Springfield to contain the problem. The Simpsons escape and find themselves on the run. Now funny enough, in this scene, Bart takes a dig at Disney, wearing a bra on his head to look like Mickey Mouse, and saying he's the symbol of an evil corporate overlord. If only he knew. Marge is talking to Lisa about how they need to get to Seattle to tell everyone of the plot to destroy Springfield, and Lisa shushes her mom, warning her not to speak so loudly because people could be listening in. Well, Marge reassures her that no one is listening, until it's revealed that a dummy conductor has been listening and broadcasting the entire conversation to the NSA. Now, government surveillance was already a pretty popular conspiracy around the time the movie was made, but after the revelations of 2013, when it came out that the NSA was in fact doing that exact thing on the general population, a funny joke now seems prophetic. There's another prediction in the Simpsons movie that matches up pretty amusingly well with our real world. Near the end of the film, Tom Hanks films a promotional video for the US government and says, "The US government has lost its credibility, so it's borrowing some of mine." Pretty funny joke featuring America's dad. But then, in 2022, this basically happened like for actual real, when the current administration ran an anniversary campaign ad featuring Tom Hanks narrating the events of the first year of the Biden administration. Everyone raced to Twitter to comment that, yep, Simpsons did it first. The Simpsons had hit the nail on the head once again. Number 1, Siegfried and Roy. Now, some of our younger viewers might not even have any idea who these guys are. Maybe you're like me and you kinda know who they are through pop culture osmosis more than you do as real icons. Most specifically The Simpsons. The season 5 episode, Springfield with a $, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Legalized Gambling, centers around Mr. Burns' plan to dominate Springfield's wharf after the town legalizes gambling in a way to revitalize its economy. It's probably a top 5 episode for me. There's just so many good bits in this one. From Homer singing about Marge's gambling demon to Mr. Burns going all Howard Hughes with the Spruce Moose and Homer's hilariously bad Florida costume for Lisa, and the Siegfried and Roy parody, Gunther and Ernst. The pair of German performers are a clear-as-day stand-in for Siegfried and Roy, the famous Las Vegas big cat performing duo. Now, in the episode, Gunther and Ernst joke that their tiger, Anastasia, loves her new life in show business compared to the wilds of the jungle. And we get a quick flash cut to Anastasia sleeping happily before she's apprehended by the duo. The scene cuts back and Anastasia sicks herself on the duo, tearing them apart. It was a pretty quick throwaway joke at the expense of 2 very minor Simpsons side characters, but in 2003 it became unfortunately tragic when an extremely similar incident would happen to the real-life inspiration. During a show, a tiger manticore attacked Roy critically, leaving him with a stroke and unable to ever perform again. No word on if the real duo ever saw the Simpsons episode. Now, the writing team for the episode commented on the unfortunate coincidence, saying they had no idea that it would ever actually happen, but stated that it was bound to happen eventually. As it stands, it's now a bit of a lip-biting moment in an otherwise absolutely classic episode.
Coming in number 5, we've got horse meat. You know, a lot of shady stuff goes on in the food industry. One would hope that this kind of nonsense would be dealt with appropriately when it came to feeding children, but it's not always the case. I guess the whole feeding just children horse meat is more of a joke than anything, but check this out. Back in 1994, the 100th episode of The Simpsons aired, titled Sweet Seymour Skinner's Badass Song. It tells the tale of a woefully mismanaged public school. What else is new, right? Well, during all of the chaos where principals were fired, hired, refired, and rehired, we get a quick gag concerning some equine cuisine. Springfield Elementary's lunch lady tossed a lovely assortment of assorted horse parts, now with more testicles, into a pot to be turned into some sort of meal for the students, whatever that may be. That kind of joke has been long running, with many folks assuming that thanks to low budgets, schools have to resort to less than stellar foods. So, horse meat for the kids. However, one might think that corporations whose profitability relies on serving the food they advertise might think twice before serving horse meat in something that isn't labeled horse meat. Not quite the case. In 2013, almost 20 years after that episode of The Simpsons aired, there was a huge food-based scandal in Britain. Can you guess what kind of meat was found in all sorts of supposedly pure beef? You got it. Horse. And this wasn't just happening at dinky little school cafeterias or independent burger joints stationed near wharfs. We're talking about Taco Bell serving something that wasn't actually all beef, which actually isn't that surprising, but still. Taco Bell, Bird's Eye, and Breaks all had products that claimed to be all beef but ended up having traces of horse meat throughout. Jeez Louise, that's not necessarily something you want to hear after scarfing down a beef skewer or a Crunchwrap Supreme. So a joke about cheaping out at the expense of the American school system actually turned out to be a pretty real situation where some corporations that should know better cheaped out. Way to go, team. Coming in at number 4, we've got mutant tomatoes, and not the teenage ninja kind. We're talking about nuclear crops here. Enormous, bulbous, strange growth-ridden plants you probably don't want to consume. But what if they're addictive and have major profit-reaping capabilities? What then? Let's start with the Simpsons story and then move on to what happened in the world after. In the episode E.I.E.I.D.O., Homer finds himself at the forefront of a potentially brand new industry, tobacco. After skipping town to avoid a duel with a gun-toting colonel, Homer and his family settle down at his dad's old farmhouse. He buys some tomato and tobacco seeds from Sneed Seed and Feed, formerly Chuck's, and tosses them all over the property. After introducing some plutonium to the works, the two crops become one, producing a highly addictive plant known as tobacco. Part tomato, part tobacco, all despicable. The plutonium causes this stuff to grow even bigger than it would have otherwise, reaching extremely large sizes and causing anyone who eats some of it to become addicted. Sure, the taste is bad, but think about how relieved you'll feel after you eat one every hour for the rest of your life. It's probably better for you than smoking too. The development of this habit-forming food causes a whole lot of other issues, including but not limited to corporate espionage, rampaging farm animals, and a helicopter crash. So what did this predict? Enormous, potentially dangerous crops spurred on by the introduction of nuclear waste. In 2013, a bunch of Japanese farmers started noticing that some of their crops were growing disproportionately large. In addition to their size, these crops also developed odd properties, like additional growths that didn't match the plant's usual shapes. All this strange stuff was happening relatively close to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, where 2 years earlier a meltdown occurred. Now, these huge fruits and veggies aren't ironclad proof that the nuclear waste caused excess growth, but it definitely paints a vivid picture now, doesn't it? We'll see what other changes occur over the next little while, and maybe even see the development of a new tobacco-tomato hybrid. It would be a better way to wean off smoking rather than vaping, that's for sure. Coming in at number 3, boring VR tasks. Video games were supposed to transport us to far-off worlds full of colorful characters and exciting things to do, right? A vision of the future where anything is possible. You could be a pro athlete, fly around on a hoverboard, pilot insane spacecraft, and more. Well, that was what the vision of video games was. Most cartoons that featured gaming would have characters teleported inside the software, taking on the roles of player characters in all sorts of far-out scenarios. However, The Simpsons saw right past that era of camp and craziness and got right into the meat and potatoes of today's legendary activities. Some popular games out there don't require you to shoot 100 aliens or ride your horse into the abyss. Some are just farming simulators or walks through the woods. Hell, there are even truck driving and food planting and serving sims that you can play in VR. Folks had such lofty aspirations for virtual reality, from the fever-dreamy interpretation of Lawnmower Man to lunatic life sims. But here we are, with some not quite consumer-ready tech and a whole lot of mundane tasks made interesting by their virtual components. Maybe The Simpsons knew that life was only gonna get drearier, and good old-fashioned hard work would have more appeal than sitting in front of a spreadsheet all day. Would you rather trim a hedge on a sunny day or input data in a cubicle? The choice is yours. Coming in at number 2, Arnold Palmer. Now this one is a little morbid. I'm sure most folks out there know about the legendary refreshing beverage named after the equally legendary golfer. Half iced tea, half lemonade, the Arnold Palmer. Well, as it turns out, a joke made by the writers of The Simpsons lined up a little too well with a real-world event. During the premiere of the 28th season, titled Monty Burns' Fleeing Circus, Homer decides to load up a water gun with said famous beverage. When Marge asks what he's doing, he tells her that he's going to Arnold Palmer Lenny, implying that he would soak his pal in the liquid. Now, this doesn't seem all that freaky, right? A simple gag pulled by TV's favorite simple dad. Thing is, on the day the episode aired, the golfer Arnold Palmer passed away. Of course, this could be chalked up to sheer coincidence, but what are the odds that they scripted, voiced, animated, and aired that joke, and it ended up being on the same day as Palmer's unfortunate passing? The world works in mysterious ways, that's for sure. And finally at number 1, Disney owns Fox. It's almost as if the writing was on the walls for years. We like to think we've got plenty of choice when it comes to the media we consume these days, but most IPs are owned by a constantly shrinking set of companies. But wow, has Disney ever taken over a lot of stuff. And Fox was right on the money too, some 20 years before the merger actually went through. In the episode When You Dish Upon a Star, there's a quick visual gag where we see the 20th century Fox logo in all of its resplendent glory, but there's a little addendum to it. Underneath the shiny gold letters, you can see that it is now a division of Walt Disney Co. Somebody saw the way entertainment companies were growing and predicted a buyout way ahead of time. I guess it only makes sense, but wow. An insidious collection of IPs to constantly market and remarket to the increasingly online demographics of tomorrow was predicted in the 90s. I doubt they would have seen the streaming revolution coming, but the way that Disney has always been protective of its image as well as immensely profitable kinda made this one a no-brainer. Although, we only say that through hindsight. Whoever wrote this gag had foresight like no other.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Ebola outbreak. Back in 2014, South Park released an episode titled Gluten-Free Ebola, which was season 18's second episode. While in this episode, residents of the town start to die from violent gluten-related deaths. In the same week that episode was aired, an Ebola strain was discovered and multiple people contracted the virus. In fact, people were so freaked out by this prediction that people went on saying that this is evidence of the Illuminati. They claim that this show exposed predictive programming. Predictive programming is a theory that the government or people of power are using movies, shows, or even books to prepare us for the future. They have planned these future events and show it to the media years before it happens. Why would they do this? Well, it's a form of mass mind control. It sounds pretty crazy, I know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Coming in at number 4, we have the Chipotle food contamination. Back in October of 2009, South Park released an episode titled Dead Celebrities. This was from season 13, episode 8. In this episode, Ike gets haunted by dead celebrities. But ignore that for a second because that's not important. In the episode, we see an animated version of Bill Mays advertising a product known as Chipotle Away. He claims that this product can get rid of stains on your underwear caused by eating Chipotle. Well, 6 years after this episode aired, in 2015, E. coli was found in Chipotle food products. As a result, there were 2 outbreaks of E. coli poisoning. More than 55 people were affected by this across 11 states. As a result, Chipotle had to close down 43 restaurants in Oregon and Washington alone. So it's pretty crazy that South Park made that whole joke about Chipotle and people being so sick from it that they needed a stain remover. Moving on to number 3, we have President Trump. Scarily enough, South Park has made a number of accurate predictions regarding Donald Trump. Let's start with an episode from 2015 titled Where My Country Gone. It was the second episode of season 19. In this episode, a Donald Trump-looking man ends up becoming the President of Canada, even though we have prime ministers here. The episode said that the Canadians found him funny at first, so they voted for him. And then he got elected by a mistake, and then people realized that mistake. Isn't that eerily similar? Moving on, in the episode, a wall gets built in order to keep the Americans out of Canada. Need I remind you, this episode came out in 2015. Trump proposed to build a wall a month later during his presidential campaign. Continuing on, we have Trump's tweets. Now, Trump is known to go onto Twitter to express his opinions without filter. But South Park managed to predict one specific message that Trump would tweet 2 days before he actually tweeted it. Let me explain. So on September 20th, 2017, South Park released an episode where they made fun of the escalating tension between Trump and Kim Jong-un. But in the episode, they replaced Trump with President Garrison. Well, in the episode, Tweak is worried that the president will start World War III with North Korea from his aggressive posts on social media. Well, just 2 days later, Trump tweeted out describing Kim Jong-un as, and I quote, a madman who doesn't mind starving or killing his people, threatening that he will be, and I quote, tested like never before. Literally, the episode just talked about this, and then Trump goes out and tweets a threatening message just like the episode predicted. Either Trump watches South Park or South Park has got Trump all figured out. In our second spot, we have the black market KFC. Selling KFC illegally sounds outright outrageous. So people thought it was hilarious to see residents in the show looking on the black market to get their chicken fix. In an episode from 2010, becomes legalized in South Park, and the town's KFC turns into a medical dispensary. So in order to get their chicken, people turn to the black markets. And Cartman was selling buckets of chicken illegally. No way this would ever happen in real life though, right? Wrong. 8 years later, most KFCs in the UK were forced to close their restaurants. People then went on eBay and other websites to buy buckets of KFC chicken. That's how desperate they were. Some buckets were selling for £100. That is insane. So the fact that something this absurd came somewhat true is insane. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Carnival Poop Cruise. Back in an episode from 2010, which was season 14, episode 14, South Park made a joke about the Carnival Cruise Line, which would later become a gross reality. So in this episode, Randy and Sharon are watching TV. That's when a newscaster appears and says, and I quote, "Passengers said the Carnival Cruise Line smelled like poop." but that was an improvement. Well, guess what? In 2013, an engine fire caused the electric toilets on the ship to stop working. People had to do their business in bags. Not only that, but the floors were flooded with sewer water and bags of human waste. Passengers on board the ship said it reeked of human feces, as you could imagine, just like the show predicted. That is quite weird and disgusting, if you ask me.